It was the second day of the film shoot. We were in a tiny, tiny village in Morocco. And the reason you film there is because the buildings it's like people are living the way they lived 1,000 years ago. And so if you can imagine, we're in this kind of courtyard area, buildings all around us. The village, the entire village has come out to see this thing. Hundreds of people hanging out the windows and everything. And then they've got the set dressed to look, like first century stuff. You got camels and donkeys and people selling things, and then you got the crew, another 200 people, and it's just a lot of noise and a lot going on and all this. And the camera was in front of me, and it was on a scaffolding, and I'm looking up at the camera, and I can see the camera's about to roll in just a couple of minutes. It was only the second day of the shoot, and we were going to do Matthew chapter 11. And the speech, it was a long speech, and it kind of goes like this. Jesus, he's in these Galilean villages of Chorazin and Bethsaida. And he says, woe to you, Chorazin. Woe to you, Bethsaida. He says, if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, two very pagan places, they would have repented. Sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. Jesus has gone into these areas. He's poured himself out. Just poured himself out. He's poured out truth. He's poured out healing. He's fed people. He's just like, you just can't imagine. And the people just don't care. They just go about life. They just go about their business. And it's interesting because sometimes from Jesus movies, you get the sense of Jesus just kind of wandering from village to village. But there was no wandering in Jesus' life. Every moment of his life was prophesied. Every word he spoke was prophesied. All Jesus did 100% of the time was obey his Father, frame for frame, moment to moment, word for word, relationship with relationship. That's all he did, was walk around completely fulfilling the law and the prophets so that there was not one comma that wasn't left unfulfilled. That's why we see him hanging on the cross. He says, it is finished. I did it. I did it. Every moment of his life was specifically chosen, orchestrated. So he's in these villages. He's pouring himself out. But then it comes time he's got to move on. According to his Father's plan, he's got to move on. And so he weeps before these people. Woe to you. The translation would be, my heart breaks for you. Okay. So I'm just about to do this speech, and I'm frightened. It's only the second day of the shoot. I'm not quite confident yet. I don't know if I can pull it off. And there's another little thing. I'm going to give you a little acting lesson. One of the things that an actor needs to understand when he's playing a character is the character's point of view, what the world looks like through the character's eyes. It's obvious. Two people will look at the exact same thing and have two completely different reactions. So my job in the role of Jesus was to find out what this all looks like through his eyes. So once I can gain that perspective, I can portray him accurately. Now I had prayed and I prayed and I prayed for weeks for some kind of revelation. And I'm not an experiential guy. I was seeking a mindset and understanding. And here I was, the camera's about to roll, and I didn't have it yet. And I could see it was just going to be 60 seconds. And I tell you, I began to pray. And I'm pacing back and forth across this thing they call a focus line, and just begging the Lord, show me what it all looks like through your eyes. Looking out at this huge scene of just masses of people and people moving and all this going on. Lord, show me what it all looks like through your eyes. Now here's where the story gets a little bit tricky, because I don't have the words to express what happened. And also, I'm always very careful with experience stories. Whenever someone shares a story, you check it against these pages to make sure this guy isn't giving you nonsense, okay? Here's the best I can do. I'm praying, Lord, show me what it all looks like through your eyes. And it was like fraction of a moment of time. And it wasn't something that I saw, it was something that happened. And what it was heartbreak. Heartbreak beyond any heartbreak I ever imagined was ever possible. It was so traumatic that I had a physical reaction to it. Somebody knocks the wind out of you. It was like somebody had punched me in the stomach with a baseball bat. And I couldn't breathe for the longest time, trying to regain my breath. And I just exploded in tears. And I stood there in front of these hundreds of people just weeping and weeping. And I couldn't control my emotions for almost an hour. That's how horrible it was. And in the middle of that, in the ways that I know the Lord deals with me, a scripture rose in my heart. He had compassion on the crowds because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And in the ways the Lord deals with me, I knew he was giving me just a glimpse of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of his heartbreak for lost people, for anybody who would choose to live even one moment of his or her life outside of the fullness of his grace, the fullness of his provision, the fullness of his care and leadership. Again, if I can go back to that example, it's like you've got all this hope for your kid inside you. You've got all this hope. And to see your kid fall that much short simply because he wants to do things his own way. Oh, the heartbreak. I liken it to, you're sitting on the porch and, your toddler is playing and there's a road in front of the house. And you see the toddler heading for the road. And what do you do in a moment like that? You go, well, I told him not to play on the road. You come out of your shoes. I think that Jesus' words also in Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest for your soul. I wasn't there 2,000 years ago. But given what I learned about him, I don't think it was, come to me. It was like, come to me. Because he knows what happens when you cross that road. Imagine your toddler, come to me. And then your toddler looks, and keeps going. And you see the car coming, come to me. Keeps going, wow. And you see that in front of your eyes. If you can tap into that and multiply it a billion times. You got Jesus standing on a street corner 2,000 years ago. You got Jesus saying, woe to you. You got Jesus weeping on the steps of the temple. He says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often have I longed. Listen to the emotion behind his words. How often have I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. In other words, he describes himself as having the heart of a mother to protect and to care. He says, but you were not willing. Look, translation, open your eyes. Your house is left to you desolate. And the tears and the tears. This thing of Jesus being on the Mount of Olives night after night praying. We tend to picture that, I don't know, just kind of religious, and I'm sure that was a big part of it. I wasn't there 2,000 years ago. But I'm going to guess that a lot of that time was spent just weeping his eyes out. Just weeping before his Father. Begging his Father for the strength to get out there the next day and do the same thing over and over and over. Weeping before his Father for the lostness of his children. So on that day, I remember I just stood there weeping, and it was, as I said, it was only the second day of the shoot. Nobody was familiar with me, so they were a little bit shocked. And I walked over to this little mud wall, and I sat down there among the extras, and just crying and crying. And I remember the director, his name was Reg. He came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Are you okay?" And I looked up at him and I said, "It kills him, Reg. It just kills him." And I'll never forget, he got, this mist in his eye, and this look in his eyes. He said, "I know. That's why we're out here doing what we're doing." You see, you just take your time, get yourself together, and then we'll carry on. Jesus. I mean, imagine just loving someone so much that you give up all that is. To be born in a barn? It's another thing I discovered. If anybody has a choice in life, it's the Son of the living God. I mean, if I was going to plan out salvation, would I choose a barn? No, I'm God, man. I'm going to choose somewhere nice and clean and cushy. To work with his hands for 20-something years, anonymously. To stand on street corners and pouring himself out to thankless people over and over. It is one of the most remarkable things in all of Scripture that in the book of Acts, and I don't remember the number exactly, it says that in the very beginning, it says that all the believers, after Jesus ascended, all the believers were gathered in a room. And I think the number was 120. I mean, thousands came. Thousands heard. And at the end of the day, there were 120. So you got Jesus day after day trying to save his babies. And when all that doesn't work, he lays down on a piece of wood, wham, wham, blood spills into the ground. Jesus.